Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 28th of February, 2025. Sarah, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm grand. I'm not going to comment on your appearance this week because last week I was accused in the comments of thirsting over you, which,
Oh my God. We've been friends for 20 years. Seriously.
Yeah, it's a bit late in the day, I think, now that you're married to kids for me to start thirsting over you. I missed the boat on that one.
Okay, well, steady on. People can still thirst. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, it's always in your direction, though. It's like a bit of thirst in the comments for me wouldn't go amiss, I'm just saying. Anyway, look, we're going to talk about a few things this week. We're going to talk about a Netflix show that caught my attention and you know, has me thinking about the gender wars. We're going to talk in darker terms about child sex abuse sentencing and kind of like why the country seems to take such a lenient opinion of, or the courts at least seem to take towards such a lenient approach, if I can get the words out, to possession of child sex abuse images. We're obviously going to talk about the mounting waste problem in the public sector, the Arts Council spending money like a drunken sailor, the National Gallery investing in a scanner that doesn't work. And then we might talk about housing and maybe a little bit about cancel culture near the end if we get there. But Sarah, I wanted to start off with, have you watched Apple Cider Vinegar?
I've started watching a little bit of, but I'm very familiar with the Mel Gibson story, and I followed it at the time, and I watched the 60-minute interview. There's a really good Netflix documentary all about her interview, which is basically the interview. So I'm familiar with the story.
Yeah, so for people who maybe aren't or listening or watching who aren't familiar with the story, basically Mel Gibson was a 22-year-old American way back in about 2013.
No, Australian.
Oh, my apologies. I don't know what's wrong with me today. 22-year-old Australian way back in about 2013 who basically launches this Instagram page initially where she starts sharing recipes that she says have helped her beat brain cancer. So she basically says, I'm a 20-something-year-old woman. I've incurable stage 4 terminal brain cancer, and I've rejected all treatment. I'm not doing chemotherapy. I'm not doing radiotherapy. I'm just eating my way to a healthier lifestyle. And I think in fairness, doing yoga and a few things like that as well. And the story, she quickly racks up about 300,000 followers on Instagram. She gets a book deal. She gets promoted by Apple. She launches this app about how to cook for yourself called The Whole Pantry. And long story short, turns out it's all a pack of lies. She never had cancer, and that everything collapses like a house of cards around her. And Netflix have made basically a drama series dramatizing that out of it. But I'm going to throw open the conversation by saying this, Sarah, because one of the things that strikes me both in the Netflix series and in real life is this. All the people who are skeptical of Mel Gibson in her life, the journalists who investigate her, the men in her life who don't really believe her, and even up to her partner, are men. And all the people who worship her are women, with the exception of one woman who blows the whistle. But all the rest of them, here's my question. Why are women so into this wellness stuff? Why is that? Why are stories like that and beating cancer by eating good food, why are they so appealing to women and not men?
I mean, I think so. To go back a little bit, Mel Gibson became really popular on Instagram and online. It wasn't last year. It was in the early doors of what you would describe as social media. She became a viral sensation, we'll just say. Eventually developing a wellness app. Was endorsed by Apple. I think she was actually put onto the original Apple Watch as a kind of a basic standalone app that appeared on the Apple Watch when you got it. And first of all, I think that the audience of those type of Instagram in general is predominantly female. Would that not be correct? But you're right in the sense that I think women lean more into wellness, health than men because women are more interested in is it not the case that men are far less inclined to go to the GP, far less inclined to look after themselves in any way? So let's use that as a kind of a starting point, shall we? But I think, you see, I don't want to betray women, and but I think women are a bit more prone to sort of. I could tell by your face you're waiting for me to say something like hypochondria, and I'm not going to. But there is definitely an element of women that is more interested in holistic alternative routes to health. But I'm reluctant to even put that under this umbrella, because there was a number of women who had cancer who followed Mel Gibson and, thought that this was a way for them to get better themselves. To give a bit more context, Mel Gibson was told that she had 6 weeks to live. And by the time
she said she was told that.
Or she said she was told that. She was not, in fact, told that by anybody. By the time the app and all of that was going viral, and she was an online sensation writing cookbooks, etc., I think it was year 4 after that diagnosis. I don't know the answer to the question that you're asking me. I think that women are more interested in health than men, but I don't know why women are more, I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use it anyway because I can't think of a better word, gullible to this kind of nonsense. I think maybe because women are more emotional to the sad story, to the story of a young woman getting cancer and surviving, etc. Are women not notoriously more emotional than men and swallow a sad story? That's why a lot of con artists who have gotten money out of people based on pretending to have cancer. There's been others, scams that happened. There was a woman in Ireland actually traveling around pretending to have cancer or something for a while. I think she was back in court recently. That was predominantly women as well. Women who've used their children to get attention, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, that kind of thing.
Well, men aren't immune to it because obviously there was that. What's the code we have to use here? Everyone knows who we're talking about, but there was a prominent Irish sports star from the GAA fraternity, of course, who stands accused. I don't believe that case has ever gone to court. People can correct me if it has. So I'm just going to say stands accused of faking a cancer diagnosis or a brain tumor diagnosis or something.
That's true.
So that can happen. I think con artists are equally of both genders, and I also think men are gullible and fall prey to different stuff. So like
they're called honey traps. They're called honey traps, John. So
but not only that. But I'm talking about
but men are susceptible to being conned because of a sexual trap than an emotional trap than women.
Yeah, not only that though. I mean, you're correct. You're correct. But often even before that, there's also the promise of honey traps. So I'm thinking here of those lads online who will tell you that if you just follow these 3 quick steps and then pay me 200 quid, I will tell you to have any woman in a bar falling at your feet in 5 minutes. Like the old there's a whole industry of that online, particularly on Instagram. It comes up in my Instagram ads. I don't know why, because I'm not in the market. But it's there. You've got the whole Andrew Tate stuff. You've got the men are susceptible to some stuff, but specifically on the health stuff, I have a theory. My theory, I think, is actually quite flattering to women, which is that you're so risk averse. Because you said women are more interested in their health. That is because I think the average 30-year-old woman actually thinks in her head of what her health might be like when she's 50 and how she'll look, and you're worried about the aging process, and you're kind of like, I want to make sure that I'm good looking at 45 or 50 or 60, whatever it is. The average bloke doesn't give a hoot.
No.
Like the average bloke is like, as you say, we don't go to the doctor. We don't we're much more like men take risks in right across the board more than women. They more financial risks, more physical risks, more health risks. And I think risk aversion is a big part of it. So, I mean, we just don't think about our health in the same way that women do, which presumably is one reason why you live like 7 or 8 years longer than we do on average. And it's not really talked about. And the other factor here, I think, is again, as you say, it's toxic empathy, which I think is a real thing. Because I was writing a piece this week about the German elections, and in the German elections, basically young women, 18 to 24. I mean, everyone talks about the radicalization of young men, but young women have been radicalized massively. Like they voted for the hardest of the left-wing party, basically the communists. 33% was the proportion of them who voted for that party. Like a massive outlier. Like the hard left are in the German parliament almost exclusively because of the votes of young women. And I think when you combine all these things together, I mean, what you have with women in general, I think as a man, is just this kind of vulnerability to over empathy. and I'll get in real trouble for what I'm about to say, but I'll say it anyway. Like, prioritizing empathy over logic sometimes, because I think with somebody like Mel Gibson, you've got to ask, hang on a second, you tell us you overcame a terminal cancer diagnosis and you healed it with fruit, like. And there are no articles about you anywhere having done this. You're not in the medical journals. There's no there's nobody stopped to ask those questions. They just saw the story and went, wow.
But to go back to my point, John, I mean, she would have been presumably or undoubtedly, she would have gone through a thorough series of meetings with Apple about the introduction of her app onto their watch. And we can only imagine at best the executives in Apple were 50% male and 50% female, and not one of those dum-dums thought to look her up either.
Marketing is a female-dominated profession, Sarah.
It wouldn't be only marketing. Shut up, John.
No, that's true. It's true. It's a fair point.
I definitely think that if you look back over the last, say, 20 years, we'll say, with the internet, people's lives becoming at least a 20% or more online phenomenon, you have seen the emergence, or maybe just the identification of a series of con people. There was the 9/11 fraudster. Do you remember her? People who have made, there's umpteen stories of people online, particularly women, who will do some sort of con where they pretend to be pregnant and then they lose the baby and they do this whole thing. Catfishing is another thing. And so there's a lot of online dark stuff that goes on, and maybe women are more empathetic and they fall for it easier. But it's very difficult if you start to watch somebody, the 9/11 fake or the person, and they have a really sad story, not to feel, because online feels real. It starts to feel like people. So, and the other thing about it, John, is that it's like fertility or health. I don't, touch wood, have cancer, but if you're, for example, having fertility issues, you will latch on to any story that you hear online. You will join. I have friends who've done it. You will join forums. You will latch on to stories that I've seen. Umpteen articles online, for example, that have come up over the years, that if you're having IVF, that McDonald's chips on the day of your implantation cycle or whatever part of your IVF helps with implantation. Completely absurd. There are all kinds of witch doctors and whatever, and people want to believe. They want to believe that the psychic, the crystal, the this, the that, the ever will be the thing that will get them pregnant. So if you have cancer, you want it to be true, because the alternative is so scary. You've brain cancer or you've whatever cancer, and you're, presumably if you're watching Mel Gibson on Instagram at this point in time, you're probably young. And so you're a young person with cancer, and you want to believe desperately that this might be the answer to your prayers. That's what makes it even darker. That's what makes what she did so dark, because I'm actually unlucky enough to have had two friends who died in their 30s of brain tumours, both male, both leaving behind at least one child each, young children. It is horrific. Most of the time there's no cure. And for her to have done this is dark. But yes, maybe women are more susceptible because they're more empathetic. But I think that you're underestimating people's just strong desire to believe something might work when they're desperate. And that's what these people thrive on, your desperation.
But I don't think, I think you've gotten to the nub of it, because this is where I will now lose the listeners. I like losing the listeners. I've brought you along this far, then I decide to twist the knife. But we're all vulnerable to this in every walk of life. It's a friend of mine who listens every week and knows exactly who he is. And I've quoted him on the show many times because he says very wise things to me, even though I can never name him. He said the other day some formulation of, and I'll probably get this wrong, it's something formulation of, the mind convinces itself of what the heart wants. So when you initially decide that you want something to be true, the mind will ultimately convince you that it is true. And this is true. This is primarily what we do, is primarily a political podcast, right? We talk about politics and culture in society. Yeah. And it is true that you end up convincing yourself of stuff. Like the number of people I talk to who are convinced, and it is not just It's not just people who are poorly informed. I think that's not fair. But people who are convinced, for example, that the things that Elon Musk is doing with the US government's budget, which, for the record, I support a lot of them. I think what he's doing in a lot of cases is long overdue. But there are people who genuinely believe that it's going to balance the American budget. That that's it. The debt problem is gone because Elon Musk is cutting 100 million. And like, if you challenge them on it, they'll say absolutely not. Or like, you can convince yourself of things that aren't true because you want them to be true. And we are all susceptible to it, men and women equally, I think, is the point I would make. And maybe that's a bad example, but there'll be other examples as we go on. I think it's just something it's worth bearing in mind about in life, because everyone thinks they're the exception. Everyone thinks that wouldn't be me. But I guarantee everyone here, including me, has at least one thing that they believe that isn't true, but you believe it mainly because you want it to be true. Like, I think that is true of every human being I've ever met. And most of the time that is completely harmless. And it might be, in my case, that, Manchester United are capable of winning the title again in 2 or 3 seasons, which is patently untrue. But you convinced yourself that, if you just sign this, you talk yourself into believing things that are true because you want them to be true. And I think it's an important lesson to remember.
Yeah, but I also think that Australia has, fined Belle Gibson or whatever, but I think that ultimately she's faced very little consequence apart from social cancellation for what she did, and I'm not sure that's appropriate either. I think the damage, there's just no way of knowing how many people or what impact she may or may not have had on people's treatment plans for cancer, but you really have to be a dark individual to have done what she did.
You think that, but you think that, but I felt sorry for her. Partially because I'm, like most men, an absolute sucker for pretty face, and I felt sorry for her.
Oh, she's not that pretty.
I think it's not more than that. It's more than that. It's more the kind of like she obviously has suffered social ruination. I mean, no one would ever want to be publicly associated with it.
Imagine, think about the mental gymnastics you have to be doing to put your head down on the pillow every night while Apple is launching your wellness app and you're standing on a stage talking about how you cured your own cancer, and you put your head on the pillow at night and it's not true.
Well, these people never do. They're delusional, so they convince themselves that it is true, Sarah. That's how it works. You convince yourself that the lie is true. That's how. I mean, I guarantee you, she could have passed a lie detector test at the beginning. If before the questions started getting really awkward. That's my view. Anyway, we won't spend more time there. Let's talk about paedophiles. Just cheer things up. I wanted to talk about this because it's something that, I mean, it's the one thing that seems to unite the public almost consistently on a weekly basis, is a story that goes something like this. Middle-aged man walks into court, stands accused of possessing the most foul child sex abuse material, because we don't call it child pornography, we call it child sex abuse material. It's
child rape imagery. Yeah.
Child labor, whatever you want to call it. Goes in front of a judge, says some version of, very sorry now, I got curious and I got a porn habit that went wrong, and I'm very, very sorry, and it was a dark time in my life, Judge, and I'll never do it again. And the judge looks at prior court precedents and says, grant suspended sentence, out you go. And then the country, people either meet it with quiet resignation, or those who comment on it are like, this is an outrage. And I wanted to talk about it because there's another case this week. There's a middle-aged man who has the presumption of innocence and has not been named, but you'll read about it in the newspapers. He's going into the courts charged with possessing 335 images of the most serious child sex abuse material possible. And the judge has said, we'll maintain the anonymity order while you're accused, to protect your own son, who is of school age, and your own wife from any kind of backlash that might come to you being before court, which is understandable, but seems to me, Sarah, to be a repeated pattern in this country of we do not appear as a society to take possession of this crap in any way seriously. Why do you think
first of all, I think that awarding anonymity in that way to protect his child and his family is probably appropriate, considering the social absolute ruination that comes hand in hand with these kind of charges. I mean, it's the one, as you say, it's the one thing that seems to unite the public, that we meet it with revulsion and scorn, and people who are, found to be guilty of having this kind of stuff don't survive it socially. There's loads of legal reasons why this happens. I think Fatima did a piece about it a while ago, actually, where she outlined, the precedent set by this case called DPP and Loving, and how DPP and Loving established that if you plead guilty, it is your first offence, and a number of other things, it's not appropriate supposedly for the courts to give you a custodial sentence. Second offence, different thing. But because of the precedent that's set there in law, if people began to be given suspended or custodial sentences tomorrow, they would appeal. The grounds of the appeal would be DPP and Loving, and they would most likely be successful in that appeal, and you would clog up the courts with appeals, whatever. So the laws need to be changed. There's nothing to do with, you know what I mean? And people don't like that. People want to blame. But the truth is that that's the law as it is. And I think we have a new Minister for Justice, and, I think that if we want to be serious as a society, because the thing is that there would be no child rape imagery and therefore children being raped for imagery if there wasn't a market for it. And if we want to get serious about it and we want to send a message, we need to change the law such that judges can award fully custodial sentence to first-time offenders. Because really, I believe in my heart that nobody stumbles upon that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've obviously never looked it up, but I gather it's not something you stumble upon. It's not something that's on a normal porn website. You have to go looking for it. You have to go down dark rabbit holes. You have to seek it out. It doesn't find you. You don't, it's not Tinder. You didn't swipe the wrong way and it came up on your phone. You looked for it, you found it. And I think that I think that you are a sick person. I think most of society would agree with that. And I think that you're not, that you have something in you that makes you want to look at that stuff. And I'm not sure that just goes away any more than somebody's sexuality changes. Do you know what I mean? So I think we need to get really serious about it. But that's legislative reform. Like, it's not, there's no point in clogging up with appeals. That's just, people don't like it. People want to blame or whatever. But the truth is, that's the way it is. And if we want to be serious and we want these people, I don't think in my heart of hearts, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think that if you're somebody who's actively watching images of children being raped, that you get caught, you go to court, you get a suspended sentence, and you go home and you go, yeah, I think I'll give that up now.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
I mean, I have a few thoughts on this.
Maybe some people, by the way, maybe some people get scared straight. It's possible. People get scared straight and they just don't look at it ever again because they're terrified of their life of being back in court or whatever. And by the way, I will say that most of the time, and I'm not saying this is enough, so don't come at me in the comments because it's not. I'm not saying it's enough, but most of these people are named where they're from and they're put on a sex offenders register. It's not enough, but it's not nothing. And I think that there are people who suffer deep public humiliation. Not enough. They should be in jail, but it's not nothing.
Well, as they should suffer deep public humiliation.
Yeah.
But there's a few thoughts I have here in relation to this. I mean, first of all, I think DPP versus Loving is wrong in that, it allows for these mitigating circumstances. And it seems to me, who's not a lawyer, that lawyers go into court basically with, they're seeking in their defense to establish a few salient points along the way. First of all, they're trying to establish what's easy to establish is this is a first offense. That's just, it is or it isn't. But in many cases it is. Secondly, they're trying to establish, I think, that the material is not at the most severe end of the scale in all cases, or that the bulk of it maybe isn't. And I have no idea what that scale is, and I don't particularly want to know, and we're not going to discuss it on the show.
I do, and I do, and it's a very definitive. You can't argue your way out of the scale. The scale is the scale. It's very descriptive. What grades things are, what they involve, ages, everything. So there's no arguing out. I mean, obviously, if they're at the lower end of the scale and you're giving the mitigating circumstances on behalf of somebody, you'd be arguing that they were on the lower end of the scale. But you can't argue your way out of what it was. because the definitions of what the scale are very clearly outlined.
Okay.
So you can't say, like, you can't, no, but what I'm just trying to, the point I'm just trying to make is that you can't go in and say, well, this isn't that bad, because I don't think it's, like, it's very clear what the scales are.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. That's helpful. That's helpful for the listeners to clarify. The other thing is, the thing that really grinds my gears is when people go into court and they basically give some version of this following speech. And if you read enough of these cases, you'll see it come over and over again. You know, Joe Bloggs was going through a dark time in his life. He was suffering from depression and mental illness. He developed a pornography addiction. This gradually translated into harder material. He got curious. He got caught. He's very sorry. It'll never happen again. I'm going to quote a friend of mine who said this to me last week. He said that that's just not how sexual orientation works. It's just not how it works. I mean, there's nobody watching this podcast who has ever watched adult material, pornography, whatever it is, and kind of gone, well, you know, I'm a straight person and I've watched enough straight material now. I wonder if I'll look at what the gays get up to and maybe that'll turn me on. That just doesn't happen. I mean,
no.
And if it does, you probably bisexual or you have that orientation, but like for straight people, that just doesn't happen. So the idea that, like, you know, adult pornography is a gateway to child pornography, I think suits a lot of people. It suits clearly the defendants in these cases. It probably suits some social conservatives who want to ban adult pornography. And by the way, I think there's a strong case for that. But I think it probably suits them to have that kind of fiction existing in law. And thirdly, it just suits the paedophiles. But my biggest thought about all this, Sarah, is that we as a society just are not coming to terms with the scale of this problem. There are multiple cases of this nature per week, right? Multiple cases, and they're the ones who get caught. This is the precisely what I was going to say. I mean, in any crime, the portion of people who get caught committing that crime is a fraction of the people who actually commit the crime, right? You know, that is not the fault of the Gardaí. That is just the reality of life in the world. The vast majority of, you know, if you've ever had your house burgled, as I have, there was never a prospect of thieves being caught. My car was. Well, put it this: thieves were never caught. Most people who commit crimes don't get caught.
But put it this way, John: there's no website that's in existence because 2 people a week are visiting it.
Yes.
So, you know, the websites are there because there's traffic. The guards can't ever, you know, can only scrape the surface of what, you know what I mean? Like the amount of investigative effort and time that goes into, you know, tracking somebody down, catching them, arresting them, creating a book of evidence, blah, 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 is huge. So they're only ever going to scratch the surface. So you need the law to be a massive, massive deterrent for these freaks. And, you know, that's why the law needs to change. It's not going to go away. Case,
it has to be a deterrent. And it's not. I am reminded, by the way, separately, of a conversation I had years ago with somebody, like I say years ago, maybe 18 months ago, with somebody who was on about prostitution and prostitution rings. And this person's strong anti-immigration views, as I have strong immigration skeptical views myself. I was basically like, no, this is all these prostitution rings. It's foreign people traffickers bringing in the women, and, you know, it's disgraceful. And I said to him, yeah, but who do you think the clients are, mate? You know, they're like, you know, the clients are disproportionately Irish blokes who can afford to drop, I don't know, a couple of £100, whatever it is, for an afternoon on their lunch break. And I remember years and years ago, Sarah wrote an article along the lines of saying, you know, if you want to tackle prostitution in Ireland, if you really want to drive it, if you really want to crack down on it, then you shouldn't ever prosecute a prostitute. What you should do is simply track them, arrest all their clients, and then not even like the punishment shouldn't even be a fine. The punishment should be an ad in the national newspapers with here are the people arrested last week for visiting prostitutes, and that would drive demand to the floor. And there are people who are going to get really annoyed at me for saying that in the comments, but it's true. And I think the naming and shaming, if you want to deal with this kind of crime, you've got to make the deterrence real. And I think with prostitution, that will be enough. But with child sex abuse material, it's not, because these guys are addicted, and I just believe they're going to keep going back, and we've done nothing about it.
No. And it's probably getting worse because the internet and the world is becoming a darker and a darker place. So I don't know. But
well, is it not something that Jim O'Callaghan could fix? We talked about it last week. Like it just seems to me to be an obvious area that government should legislate. Like, you know, it's free popularity. Just come out and say, you know what I'm going to do? I think you said this to me last week off air. It was your point, so I'll credit you with it. But I think you basically said, look, it's basically 5% in the polls, not 10% in the polls, to just come out and say, look, pass a law that says anyone caught with pedo material is going to prison for 5 years, no appeals. That's it. So,
who, like, not even the sock Dems would come out and go, no, we're against this. We want to defend that. That's, too punitive. We don't like that. No one's going to be against that. It's a winner.
Yeah. And I can hear the conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists, by the way, ask a fair question. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying they're right, but I'm saying they ask a fair question, which is, here's something that will be massively popular, relatively easy to do, and government after government persistently refuses to do it. And then they say, why is that? And they make all sorts of dark implications about the reasons why that might be. But you can't blame them for asking the question. It's so bloody obvious. I'm not asking that question, by the way. I think it is simply political inertia. Politicians don't like making changes that involve work, and civil servants would object, and the prisons would say, well, we can't cope with this number of prisoners.
I know, but sentencing parameters for other things like knife crimes have been changed by legislation by the last government. I mean, things can be done. So let's see. We got comments last week that were being too kind and nice to Jim O'Callaghan. So,
that reminds me, I got an email from somebody. If I've forgotten your name, that is not. Please don't take offense to the fact that I've forgotten your name. It's just that I've remembered the email now, but I don't want to give the wrong name. Somebody who basically said the email was, John, you're always talking in the podcast about how the prisons are too full and this affects sentencing. Can you elaborate on why that is? And I think it is because if you are a judge and you're sitting in court and you've got this guy in front of you for common assault, and if you sentence him to 6 months in prison, well, there's a limited amount of space. So that almost certainly means somebody on the other end of their sentence is going to get out early. And that person may have committed a more serious crime. Do you think that's fair, Sarah? I mean, or do you think I'm totally wrong on this whole topic?
I think I wouldn't like to make an assessment or a judgment on what judges are secretly thinking when they're sentencing. I think you'd have to take that on a judge-by-judge basis. I think some judges are slightly harsher than others. But I think overall, if there were more prison spaces, there would probably be more
custodial sentences.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. But I don't know what judges are thinking. But yeah, I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say is we 100% should be building a prison. 100%. We need more prison spaces. Not for one of the reasons being that the prisons that we have are becoming inhumane in themselves because they're so overcrowded. And second of all, if you get a 7-year or 6-year sentence for kicking somebody's head in on a night out and causing them brain damage, you shouldn't be getting out 2 years early just because there's no space for you. I've just made that scenario up. That's not a specific, but you get my point. Nobody should be getting out early from a violent crime just because there's no space. Absolutely
correct.
Not.
Although I sometimes wonder what kind of a prison we would build. Like, would it be a prison or would it be a luxury hotel? Just like, once the human rights lawyers get their hands on the planning, and it becomes like, are there sufficient mingling areas? Is there enough social space? Does the prisoner have enough space in the evening? Is there enough? Is the television large enough? Will they have access to sports? I do wonder whether you'd end up with kind of like a 1,000 cell luxury hotel that just happens to have locks on the hotel room.
Sorry, I admire your optimism, John, because TII, this is Ireland. If it's anything like the Children's Hospital, we'd start it next week. 20 years from now, that still wouldn't be sorted. And by the time the prisoners move out, there would be no doors and, or move in, there'd be no doors. And it wouldn't be, you know what I mean? It wouldn't do what it's supposed to do. There'd be no prisoners in it. It's like the Children's Hospital doesn't have any children in it yet.
Well,
a luxury hotel. What I mean, where do you think you live?
I just always think, and I recommended this show to people before. I know many people will have watched it. If you haven't, go on to Amazon, order the complete DVDs of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. There's an episode about how the best running hospital in Britain has no patients in it. There's a whole episode about that, about how like civil servants is running the most efficient hospital in Britain, but there's no patients in it. And it's just effectively about the Children's Hospital. In 1980s, like 2 British lads wrote this drama that's effectively about the Irish Children's Hospital. If you've seen the episode, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I recommend you check it out. I think there's even clips. If you put in Yes Minister Hospital on YouTube, Once you're finished watching this, if you're watching it on YouTube, just go into the search bar, stick it in. It's well worth your time. But not enough politicians have watched it. And they also haven't watched, Sarah, about the how to spend money efficiently, because I don't like talking about this stuff on the podcast, because what is there to say? I'm just asking, what is there to say about the Arts Council wasting $6.5 million and National Gallery buying a 300 grand scanner or whatever it was that they can't fit into the building? It's just like, what are we? We're stumped. What is there to say about that? You know, Simon Harris was asked about it, Sarah, and he said, "I am incredibly angry."
Oh my god!
I mean,
the Arts Council must be shitting themselves. Like,
well, it's also. I'm sorry. That's so fake. I'm not even angry about it. Are you angry? Are you genuinely angry about it? Or are you more amused? I mean, what's the point in getting angry? Doesn't change it.
I did get angry. I got really angry about the bike hut thing, especially because at the time, I got angry in the context that at the time there was a lot of publicity going on about, you know, children on waiting lists for scoliosis in the Children's Hospital and all of that going on. And I got myself very wound up on that particular podcast. But since then, we've had a general election and people have voted for this. People voted for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil back in, knowing that this kind of stuff was going on unaccounted for. And so now I just think, I mean, it's paper money, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was. I mean, I don't think we have ever had. I don't want to say we've never had, but certainly one of the most stories that agitated Gript readers the most. Like in terms of people, I remember I actually got a phone call from somebody down. I think I mentioned it on the podcast at the time. Like a phone call from an elderly man down in Kerry who went to the trouble of getting my phone number. I think he rang like 6 people to get my number, and he rang me one day especially to say, "Don't let up on them over the bike shed. We want answers on that. We want absolute answers. We want them asked about it at every press conference." And look, reader, listener, we tried. The fact is, after that, Sarah, nobody lost their job. No one was held accountable. To this day, we don't know who signed that paperwork. And everyone's forgotten about it and moved on. And at some point, there'll be a whitewash report. And that is what's going to happen with the Arts Council. It's going to happen with the National Gallery. And at some point, like, there's no point me being angry or Sarah being angry, like, until the voters give a fuck about what happens in their own country. You know, we can just sit here and watch it. If you're angry about this, go and protest on the streets or something. But like, don't come telling us to get angry about it on your behalf, because voters don't give a shit.
Yeah, and look, ultimately, obviously, what there is that there's just a culture amongst a lot of our civil service and a lot of our NGOs when it comes to spending money that is a culture that doesn't have any value on money, doesn't have any accountability on spend, that spends money like it's monopoly money, that hasn't got a mindset that this money is our money, you know, like the state, the taxpayers' money, and therefore doesn't respect it. And until that culture is challenged, and people can, you know, you touched on earlier on about Elon Musk, and people could talk about, oh, you know, he's cutting this, he's cutting that, and it's not going to make any difference to the trillions and trillions of dollars of problems that their economy has, etc. And that's fine, and that's a separate thing. But until there's an appetite here for that type of cultural shift, that type of cutting, that type of, you know, granular level analysis of where money is going in, out, and upside down, what's the point of getting angry? What's the point? We're not screaming out for it. We scream out for other things, and we get ourselves up into a state about things, and, you know, we worry about I would say that collectively as a country, certainly in media and a lot of stuff I've seen on social media and stuff like that, we seem to be putting more of our energies and more of our outrage and more of our outcry into things that are happening in other countries than we are into things that are happening in our own. So let's keep doing that until ultimately what will happen is, until people start to feel, and I'm not saying some people don't, but until a lot of more people start to feel a serious pinch in their own financial situation, these things will just continue unchecked, I think.
Yeah, well, one of the things I like about what Elon Musk is doing in the US, and every week I get to see, and I do try to be fair, but I think what he's doing is really, really important. Because what he's doing is, and what Donald Trump, who's instructing him to do it, is doing, is putting the fear of God into people who are responsible for spending the public's money. That's really important. They should be terrified. They should be terrified that somebody's looking over their shoulder going, how do you justify that line item? And that's just not happening.
But John, you don't even have to call it terrorized. You don't have to be terrified. That's just the basic relationship between employers and employees. Anybody who works in the private sector, certainly myself when I've worked in the private sector, but anybody who works in the private sector has a low-lying concern about whether or not they add value or earning their keep, or, whatever way you want to, depending on what industry you work in. If you're in sales, you have targets. If you're in something else, you have, whatever it is, jobs have a low level of an expectation, a contract between you and your employee that exists, that is based on a performance at a certain level. So all you're asking for is exactly that culture to be implemented, for somebody to say, my job is X, Y, and Z, and if I don't deliver X, Y, and Z, there is some chance that there may be some consequences. I may be called into a room and told, you're not performing as expected. What's going on? Why not? Not, my job is X, Y, and Z, and I'll do half of X, and sure, no one's going to say anything.
Well, it's the culture of impunity right across the public sector. I mean, I've talked with teachers in the past on this podcast, and obviously I'm married to one. And I always use that disclaimer because I'm always wary of talking about it, Sarah, because people will think that I'm just puppeting what my wife says to me, and I'm absolutely not. Because I know several teachers. But one of the most demoralizing things about education policy is the fact that you can have, and I obviously like to think my wife is a really good teacher, so that goes without saying. You can have a really, really good teacher who is putting in loads of effort and taking kids after school. And there are many, many teachers like that. They do sports at the weekends. They go above and beyond. You've got kids, you presumably see it in the school that you send them to.
Totally.
There are many, many teachers for whom teaching is vocational. And then there are teachers who are shit at their job, don't put in any effort, and the bottom line is, over the course of their two careers, those two teachers, the really good one who puts in all the effort and the really shit one who doesn't, in the public sector, they'll both end up on the same pension. They'll both be paid the same salary over the course of their careers, and the good one will probably never be promoted, and the bad one can't be sacked. That is an insane way to run anything. And that's how we've set up the incentives in the public sector. So the diligent public servants, the ones who actually put in and put in the extra effort. I mean, why should they bother? They're making fools of themselves, while the guys who sit around and sign off on 200 grand printers that don't fit into a room or scanners, whatever it is, suffer no consequences. We wonder why there's failure in the state.
And my mother was a teacher, and most of my aunties, at least, most of them are teachers or were teachers, and, took it very seriously. But I've never been in a job, nor have you, I think. And I can't imagine what it must be like to be in a job where no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, you just get paid the same as the person who doesn't care. I mean, imagine how demoralizing that must be. So, But
now it's right across the public sector. It is almost impossible to get sacked from a state job in the country, and that's a massive problem. It's been a massive problem for years. And I'll tell you now, you can sit home and you can nod at this podcast all you want. You can say, oh, yeah, that's a common sense reform, McGurk. You're on the money there. We should just be able to sack public servants. You tried to bring it in, there will be war. You know why? Because everyone knows someone else. And everyone would be of the view that, oh, wait, so that's I got my Johnny into a permanent pensionable job now. You're talking about taking away his security. Well, yes, I am. And that's why it would never happen. I think. Maybe I'm too cynical.
People are going to be really depressed for being very negative.
Well, maybe we'll cheer them up with this story you mentioned before the podcast started about how 25% of Fianna Fáil voters now regret their vote. You walk us through that one, because I do too much talking.
No, I didn't say they regretted their vote. I said 25% of voters, when polled, were asked if they had known the housing target figures that were released in the last couple of weeks, would they have voted differently? And they said yes. I think that's a very significant number, and I think that should be ignored at their peril by Fianna Fáil. I don't go so far as to think that that there was any kind of, and you might disagree with me, and I may be wrong on this, but I'll ask you actually. Do you think that those figures were withheld on purpose for politics, for electioneering purposes, should I say?
I have no evidence that they were.
Yeah,
that's the diplomatic answer. I mean, there's no. I'm just more cynical than you. I think this is all of a part with the kind of that whole stupid row about whether Micheál Martin said Mary Lou McDonald was telling lies or not, or this whole speaking time row that's been going on for months. Like, I can hand on heart say, and maybe this is because I'm in a privileged position of being a homeowner, so take it with a grain of salt. But like, would it honestly, if the figures had been 30,000, not 40,000, would it have changed your vote?
No, but I wasn't voting on that issue, and a lot of people do.
No, I wasn't either.
And I think a lot of people, I think that a lot of people during that election campaign were switching between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and maybe other parties. There was a lot of fluidity around voters in that election compared to other elections. I felt it was changing all the while. Fianna Fáil benefited from a terrible election campaign that Fine Gael had, for example, and the tide just went a bit with Fianna Fáil in the end. And I think that piece of information might have been enough to. I could feel that I can sense that might be partially true, that a percentage of those voters would have gone elsewhere because it was easy for them to kind of move around. That kind of floating voter was moving Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, in and around that area towards the very last day of that campaign. It was a funny campaign, and I think that rings true for me. That might have been the case, and that people might have voted. It would have made I'm not saying it would have made that much of a difference to the overall result. I still think we'd have Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and all of that, but it might have been the difference between 2 or 3 seats, plus or minus 2 or 3 seats either way, between maybe Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Soc Dems, maybe Labour, something like that.
Well, not if 25% of voters are telling the truth and saying they would have voted differently if they'd known that the housing targets were 10,000 short. I mean, first of all, sorry, I'm a cynic. I'm the resident cynic. I don't believe those voters. I just don't believe them. I just do not believe that they were like, well, if it was 30,000 houses, I'm going to vote for Sinn Féin, but it's 40,000 houses, so I'll go with Fianna Fáil. Because I just don't think people think that way.
I don't think it was ever going to go to Sinn Féin. I don't think that's... I don't think that's it.
Possibly not. Or an independent, or as you say, a Social Democrat or Labour. I just don't believe that the average person relates to politics in that way. Whereas I think this is one of the problems with opinion polling. I think when you ask a voter, if you had known the politicians were lying to you, would you vote a different way? I think it's one of those questions where you sound like a bit of an idiot. If you say, oh yeah, I would have still voted for them, which apparently 75% of their voters would have, but we know that 75% of Fianna Fáil voters would vote for the party, frankly, if it pulled the plug on the country and we sank. That we just know that. But I think the other 25%, I think there's a degree of, well, of course I would have voted differently if I knew they were fibbing to me. I don't know if they actually would have. That's the first thing. But secondly, in relation to this whole business of the state having housing targets to begin with, I just think it's all nuts. I mean, did you read this thing? You probably didn't, because I know you're very busy and you're working, but did you read the thing I was writing earlier on in the week about the lad down in Tipperary, and they're actually trying to make him homeless?
Which one?
Sean... his name will come to me in a second. I'm terrible with names. Listeners will know I'm absolutely terrible with names. His name will come to me in a second. But Sean Meehan is his name. And he built a little cottage on his land down in Tipperary without planning permission. It was about a 60-foot cottage. And the state has devoted considerable legal resources to making him flatten it, basically, in the middle of a housing crisis. And I just think if we were to deregulate the housing market and let more Sean Meehans build their little cottages without the state getting in their way, rather than this idea that Darragh O'Brien, whoever the Minister for Housing is going to build 40,000 houses a year, would probably have solved the problem.
I mean, you can't just get rid of all housing regulation and let people start building houses. Come on.
They did it in Texas. Do you know in Texas you don't need planning permission? You literally don't. You just, or at least, unless they've changed that in recent years, in the last time I was in Texas, they literally buy a piece of land and you can build whatever the hell you want in it. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying it's not as
stuff like that in Ireland. I wouldn't be confident in our ability to, we're not building great houses in some parts of the country with regulation, so I wouldn't be confident of what we would build without it. But yeah, look, I think pulling things down that are already built. And, as you've just pointed out, devoting considerable state funding and time to doing so would make you really question whether or not we have bigger fish to fry.
Well,
but
I have a question for you, which is and this I put this to you as a lawyer, and you can answer it with and I know actually it's not fair that I do this to you all the time, and I apologize because I do this kind of I'll put this to you as a lawyer thing all the time, and it's, in fairness, most lawyers, if you ask them a question, have time to research it, and so I don't want to put you in the spot. But
it might be an area of law I know nothing about, so go on.
It probably is but if my point is this: if I break a criminal law, and I'm indicted, and I go before the circuit court, having broken the law and standing accused, I'm entitled to a jury of my peers. A jury will come in and decide whether I'm guilty or innocent. If I break or offend you, infringe against the civil code, so suppose I defame you, for example, is the classic example, you can take me to court, but I can, at high court level, request a jury of my peers, or at least I can for the moment. I think you're reforming that, but I can for the moment request a jury of my peers to assess whether or not I have defamed you. But if I break the planning laws and the state is coming to knock down my house, as it is in the case of Sean Meehan, or that's what it wants to do, I have no recourse to a jury at all. And I think it's an anomaly in law that we have these very strict planning regulations which are there for a reason, and no one is going to argue. I'm not arguing that Sean Meehan or anyone like him would just buy a field and build 40 houses in it and sell them. That's clearly insane. But in a case like this, is there not a case for saying, let's have him bring his case about this particular planning case to a jury of his peers? This is what the law says. This is what he has done. It is up to you, a jury of his peers, to decide whether he should be able to keep his home or whether he shouldn't. Is that an unreasonable request?
No. Why not? I mean, I don't think so. But you'd probably have you'd probably need to impanel a lot of juries, because what criteria have you? What's the case? I want to keep the thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what is the deciding element of that story that makes him qualify to be tried in front of a jury? And then, if you apply that across the board, surely all of a sudden you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. And
yes, you probably do, but you kind of have to trust
hundreds of juries. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Juries are expensive and time consuming, and people have to give up their time. It's like not a small thing.
But they are there for a reason. We forget this. The point of a jury is to defend your rights as a citizen. Right? It is to literally put 12 ordinary people in society between you and the state. So the state is trying to put you in jail. The state is trying to knock down your house. The state's trying to execute you, and you've got literally 12 people standing in front of them, kind of going, "Well, you don't get to do this unless we decide that he deserves it." That's the point of a jury. Like the last line of defense. And I think when the state is coming to knock down your home, even if you have built it illegally, even if you have technically broken the law, I think there is a case for because this guy. I'm not saying he's been well advised. I'm not saying he's on the side of right or anything. I'm just saying the state is coming at him with a heavy sanction, which is we're going to knock down your home and all the money you've invested in it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the jury of your peers is there to protect you, to allow a jury of your peers to determine your liberty ultimately, potentially. So liberty is pretty high up on your constitutional rights, but so is your right to a home. So yeah, you should definitely make the case for that, John. Call Jim O'Callaghan.
Give me his number, Sarah. He's your mate, not mine. I don't. I'm kidding. All right, let's wrap this up by talking. You want to talk about Chris O'Dowd?
I do. Well, just a small thing. So Chris O'Dowd, for people who don't know, is an actor. He's in a number of movies, Bridesmaids. He's Irish, but he's kind of made it in America, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be fair?
Yeah, he plays the same kind of dopey, half drunk in each movie he's in, doesn't he?
Yeah, he definitely is kind of, what's the word, character, when they play the same character over and over again.
Yeah, he's typecast. He's kind of foppish, a bit dopey, and kind of like, but with a heart of gold, and women fall at his feet. That's the
yes. And he's married to Dawn Porter. Anyway, he would be considered. I would have considered him to be quite sound on all of the woke stuff. Would you agree with that so far?
When you say sound and all of the woke stuff, you mean that he's completely.
I mean, unsound in my opinion, but like sound on the question. Yes. But anyway, he in the last day or two has come out. He's done an interview where he has lamented ultimately the cancellation of Graham Linehan. For people who don't know, Graham Linehan is the writer of Father Ted and other things as well. Very good comedy writer who was cancelled because he came out as an advocate, a strong advocate for women, against women who are men dressed up as women. And but he's been cancelled, and he's been, well, I would say, quite badly sort of exercised from the channel, or would you say the Channel 4 scene, whatever way, the entertainment business. He has not found work to be forthcoming since he became the face of, anti trans stuff, became friends with JK.
I don't think we should call it anti-trans stuff, but I think we should call it kind of like, gender critical.
Pro-women.
Yeah.
I'll just say pro-women, pro-real women. So anyway, the point I'm trying to get to in a very roundabout way is that Chris O'Dowd has come out in an interview where he's stood up for Graham Linehan, said he misses Graham Linehan, says he feels like Graham Linehan is the best comedy writer and that he wishes Graham Linehan was writing again, etc. And I think this seems like a small thing, but in actual fact is a further demonstration of what I'm really noticing, which is that it's starting to become a little bit more socially acceptable. And I'll take the cowardice aside, but I think it's starting to become a bit more socially acceptable for people like Chris O'Dowd to say things like this when he wouldn't have dared say that 2 years ago. In a million years, Chris O'Dowd wouldn't have come out and defended Graham Linehan or stood up for Graham Linehan or said anything positive or even acknowledged that Graham Linehan existed 2 years ago. And the fact that he's doing it now is just another little breadcrumb on this thing I'm noticing of people who were quite woke starting to feel a little bit more free to, start to push the boundary out on what they may be willing to say in public about certain things. And I am happy about it.
Well, I'm a big believer in forgive, but don't forget. Like, I'll start off by talking about Graham Linehan, because, and I want to say this at the beginning before I say what I'm going to say, which is that I met Graham Linehan a few times over the last couple of years. He very kindly performed at Gript comedy nights we undertook last year. I like him, and I say this with no rancor. But like, before Graham Linehan got cancelled, he was big into trying to cancel other people. Like, he was massive. He was massive exponent of it. In fact, I was on the wrong end of it myself. A couple of efforts of what, if it was done to him, would be considered an attempt at cancellation. And in fairness, we've had a conversation about it. We're men, and the conversation will say private. But like, and I'm not trying to insert myself into the story, just to say that it's not just me. There are lots of people who are on the wrong end of Graham Linehan's ire over the years before he became the victim of it himself. I think that's worth remembering. And the same is true of Chris O'Dowd. Chris O'Dowd is to my mind, no angel on the having partaken in this stuff actively front. And like, I think it's important to recognize that what you're saying is right. Some of the veil of it is lifting, but there are a lot of people out there who when it was okay to behave abominably towards people, did so, and now are presenting themselves as kind of nice and decent people again, and horrified by all that stuff. And I think back, I would have always considered myself to be an admirer, and I wouldn't presume to call myself a friend, but somebody who would have been very fond of George Hook in News Talk.
Yeah.
And I listen to some of the people in News Talk and now complaining about how woke has gone too far. And I respect them for saying it. I'm glad they're saying it. But I remember what those people said about George Hook when he said something that I don't think merited the treatment that he got at all. And I remember what happened to Kevin Myers, who I very much would call a personal friend. And there are people now out there who will say, oh, it's all going too far in cancel culture. Well, I remember what you tried to do to Kevin. So forgive, but don't forget. That's my view on all of this. And I think it is welcome, but I also think there are a lot of people out there with apologies to make who will probably never make them.
Oh, they'll never apologize. And I don't think that courage, in inverted commas, when it's becoming easier, is courage at all. So I don't think it's a that these kind of things happening is something to celebrate them. I think it's something to celebrate us, as in not you and me, but people. You can be. The truth of the matter is that I was just speaking to my mum about this today, and I was saying that 2 years ago, maybe more for longer, there were certain issues that I would say, and I don't think I'm alone, that I would say personally, and I'm positive a lot of people will see themselves in this, that I would have taken a bit of flack from people on my views. And I don't think they're particularly strong, just honest, on immigration, on gender rights, if you want to call it, whatever we're calling it, on a whole swathe of things, societal things, everything from porn to whatever, surrogacy to whatever. And I would have taken quite a lot of heat from people. And so I'm not saying that Chris O'Dowd coming out and me starting to notice a veil lifting means something good about Chris O'Dowd. I'm saying that it's nice for people. I'm pretty tough. I can take it. But there's lots of people who listen to this podcast who will have sat at family things, who would have sat in work. They've come up to you in the street, John. They've come up to me in the street and said, well, I work in this place and I can't say what I really think and I can't do whatever. So I'm happy for them, for us, for people who have silently felt a certain way, that people, cowards, in fairness, as you point out, like the likes of Chris O'Dowd, who didn't have the courage to come out until it was easier. But I'm still happy for people who did have the courage, because it's validating and they deserve it.
It's funny, one point you made there stuck in my head, which was you were saying that, we used to get lots of criticism for your views from the left, and I did too. And what I think is really funny is that now nearly 99% of the criticism I get from people is from my right.
From the right. Yeah.
Like, I have stayed exactly where I was. My views, and I swear to God, my views, maybe this is a sign of, poor political growth, but my views are broadly exactly the same as they have been since about 2006 on a whole range of issues. A few tweaks here and there, but mostly the same. And I have watched as Irish society, or at least a chunk of it, has kind of gone, first of all, like miles off to the left, leaving me on the fringe extremes of the right. And now increasingly, like, I'm seeing a lot of people like run past my face all the way over there. And now they're shouting at me saying I'm a lefty, which I never have been and never will be. So it's just funny. Pendulum swing,
but you have a sense of humor about it, John. But you're like me in the sense that you're, resilient. You don't get upset by people accusing you of this or whatever. But some people do. Some people have found it tough. It's been tough for a lot of people. And I'm not talking about, like I said, I'm not talking about you or me. I'm talking about the 55-year-old woman who feels completely alienated in her job. Like I said, the people who come up to you in the street and say, oh my God, I listened to the podcast. It's been, they've been out on a limb. It's been cold and lonely out there. So, the likes of Chris O'Dowd coming a bit closer in, and there's others, there's people in News Talk, whatever, who are starting to speak like that. Like, that makes me happy for the 55-year-old woman, or the person who, feels like she doesn't know her grandchildren or whatever. All those people, they listen to the podcast. I'm happy for them.
I agree. Well, look, we have gone over our hour mark for the second week in a row. We just can't get enough of yakking at the moment, but we'll leave it there. Have you any final thoughts, Sarah, before we go?
Nope. I'm good. I'm done.
Well, then we will be back next week, as we always are. And in the meantime, thank you very much for listening to us and keeping us ahead of that other Gript Media podcast, which we won't even mention. We won't even mention, just in case people start. We're kidding. Go and watch Jason and Ben if you haven't already. They're very good. And we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye.